put me on.
Ask Hilary to take it away.
Yeah.
We're all ears.
Thank you. I'm a retired botanist, but I've been heavily involved for well over 30 years with Wirral Wildlife, the Wirral part of Cheshire Wildlife Trust, and in particular with the running of New Ferry Butterfly Park, which is our community reserve on old railway sidings next to Bevington Station. So that's where I come from. And for, I can't remember how many years, I've taught a couple of courses a year using the Butterfly Park, one on identifying grasses, sedges and rushes, and one just a basic introduction to identifying wildflowers. So what you've got today is an adaptation of that second one. If you can manage to see at least some of the pages on the attached document, that'll be useful at the beginning, but a lot of this I am going to do by, and we're doing that by share screen. So once we start onto that, it'll just be moving through plant photos. And then once we get to the end of that, we can unmute everybody. I've brought some bits of plants in behind me, and you'll all be able to ask questions, and we'll see what we can do at the end. So it'll run through like that. So you basically get an hour's lecture, I'm afraid, but it's got lots of pictures in it. We're going to have to use a basic number of jargon terms. I try and keep this to a minimum, but first sheet of the thing is this one. And if you can't see the sheet, then you can see it there probably. And it has some basic ones. So you've got a petal in a flower, and I think you know what petals are. They're usually brightly coloured. They're there to attract pollinators. Behind them, there's some sepals, and their function is to enclose a bud and protect it. If there's a leaf right by the shower, by the flower, then it's often a funny shape, and it's called a bract. Now, inside those petals, there will be the working bit of a flower. There'll be what's traditionally called the male part, produces the pollen, the anthers. If you tap a flower, it showers yellow stuff at you and starts your hay fever off if you're unlucky. And there's a little green centre, usually, which is the ovule, which will have things inside it which will eventually develop into seeds. And on top of that ovule, there'll be a sticky patch, sometimes stuck up on a little stalk, which is called the style. The pollen grains land on that, they germinate, they grow down into the ovule and set seeds. And that's the working bit of the flower. All the rest is to attract things. Now, the plants I'm going to use today, I'm going to introduce you to what is actually 17 of the commoner plant families, the ones you're likely to find in grass verges, on the sand dunes, since we're in Wirral, in edges of woodlands, little bits of woodland scraps we have around Wirral, in your gardens possibly. If I have an unusually wild garden, but some of them might be there. And the idea is to get you to know what the basic shape of each of those families looks like. The great advance of the 17th century was realizing that if you grouped plants by their flower shape, they fell into natural groupings, which we call families. Under that family, there's a tighter grouping called a genus, plural genera, and there's usually lots of genera to a family, and then there's a species within that. But each of those plant families, now with the knowledge we have now, will have evolved from one ancestor, probably back in the Cretaceous, 100 or so million years ago, maybe a bit less, but somewhere between 50 and 100 million years ago. And then as that's radiated out, you've got a whole plant family. So the important thing is to try and get an idea of what the family flower shape looks like, because that's the best way and easiest way to learn them. If you are looking for books, and then part of the download of stuff you can look at afterwards are sheets about what's the best field guides around and what's the best computer guides around. And do take a look at that if you're going to buy yourself something or download yourself something. Some books group flowers by their colours. yeah, that looks easy, but actually you don't learn the shapes and it gets harder and harder to sort out what you've got. If you learn the families, then you've got a starting point. So that's how we're going to go. Anything else I need to say before we move in? Probably not. So what I want to do now is share screen so that I can show you lots of pictures. So I'm going to click share screen. And then that. And then share. And I hope you can all see a buttercup. If you can't, you need to wave hard at Paula. Put your thumbs up if you can. Can everybody see? Everybody see a buttercup? Splendid. You could until it went. Until it accidentally went the next one. Back to the buttercup. Good. Now, all of these flowers, the names, the spelling of the words are on what's called a Wildflower ID drawing sheet. So don't worry too much if you're not sure what I'm calling them, or they're all on there. They're on there in alphabetical order. I'm actually going to, after we've looked at the buttercup, I'm then going to go through them in alphabetical order because it makes life easier for me. There's no particular right order. So when you come to look at that afterwards, you'll find that's how they work. And as Paula said, they say they are recording this, so it will be possible to go about after. So there's a classic simple flower, nice yellow petals, and underneath, folded back away from the petals, are the little bits that are called sepals. Now, I hope you can actually see my cursor pointing to them, but if you're on quite a small screen, you might not. Yes, Richard says it can. That's good, because I can do that. And you can also see it's got a stem, and that stem's got a ridge down it. The sepals in this one are yellowy, but some of them they're green. Even the buttercups vary on that. There's actually, first stage is recognise a buttercup. If you want to be a little bit more clever than that, then there's 3 common buttercups, and they're all out at the moment. This one, with its sepals turned back like that and a ridged flower stem, this is the Bulbous Buttercup, the least common of the 3. You might well find it on the sand dunes though, Martin. And it has a little bulb under the ground, and it dies down to that bulb around about the end of June, so you can't find it after that. If you've got one like that, except that the sepals are cupped up against the flower, so they're cupping the petals, then that's the creeping buttercup, which is a very common plant of road verges, creeps along like a strawberry does by sending out a runner and finding a new plant. And if you've got a somewhat taller one with the sepals cupping the flower and a smooth flower stem, then that'll be the Meadow Buttercup, which is another grassland species. So if you're absolutely new to flowers, it's a buttercup. If you're a little bit more careful, you can sort out which of the 3 you've got. Now, this is a plant I'm very sure you all know because you'll all have stuck it on somebody at some point or had somebody stick it on you. Sticky weed, usually called around here. I grew up in Oxfordshire calling it goosegrass. The books call it cleavers. If you're on a full computer screen and look at the edges of the leaves and the edges of the stems, you might just be able to see they look a little bit bobbly, which is going to do something clever. He's going to, yes, he's magnified it for me. There you are, you can see it looks all bobbly, and that's little tiny hooks. And that's why it clings on to you. Now, this is the bedstraw family, and most of them are just called something bedstraw. The key thing is you've got these whorls of leaves, 6 to 8 leaves all joined to the same point on the stem. And all the bedstraws have little leaves in whorls like that. The flowers are little tiny things, mostly white, with 4 little petals there, which are actually all joined together below that. And on cleavers, of course, you get these burry seeds, not on the others. So if you find something with whorls of leaves like that, or indeed like that, then you've got a bed straw. Little tiny cross-shaped white flowers, sometimes 5 lobes, sometimes 4 in the middle. This one is sweet woodruff. It's a woodland plant. Doesn't grow wild as far as I know in Wirral, but is quite popular as a ground cover garden plant. It sits in a corner of my garden doing that. That's where this photo is taken. So whorls of leaves, little tiny flowers with 4 or 5 petals. Then look in the bedstraw family. And here's another very easy one. That trumpet shape is the bindweeds, the bane of gardeners. I have a running battle at the back of my allotment with one of these species. Here, all of those petals are what we call fused together. They're all joined, so they make the trumpet. And down below, that sepals are actually all joined as well. Now, if you look at the bud at the top there, the green things at the bottom, hiding the bottom of the bud, they're not actually the sepals. They are bracts. So that's an example of a bract. Quite different shape to the leaves just to its left. Now, there are several sorts of bindweeds, and actually this is not a common one. This is one we found in a hedge at Neston. It's hairy bindweed. The only bit that's hairy is the flower stem. Names are sometimes a little odd. Much more commonly, you'll find the white flowered versions. And again, if you're new to it, then it's just say, yes, that's a bindweed. I know it's a bindweed. That's a good start. If you're a little more clever, then there are 2 big white flowered bindweeds. One has big bracts like this that hides the sepals, even when they're in flower. The other one has shorter bracts, and you can just see the sepals. The shorter bracted one is the field bindweed, a native one. The bigger bracted one is the American garden escape. It didn't stay in people's gardens very long, which is called large bindweed. If you're out on the sand dunes, then you'll sometimes find the very small relation of this one. I mean, the flowers on this one are a good 2 to 3 inches. What does that come out as? 5 to 7 centimetres long. There's a much smaller version with flowers only about 2 or 3 centimetres long, which is the field bindweed, and that occurs on the sand dunes. And that again is pink and white. So bindweed, if you're new to it, if you know a bit about plants, or as you get to know more, split them up into the different sorts of bindweed. Now, if you've got a herb garden, I'll think quite likely you've got borage in it. And this isn't borage, but it's one of the borage family. This is green alkanet. And they're all hairy, this family, quite bristly hairy. And they have bright coloured flowers, which in the forget-me-nots and the green alkanet here are mostly blue. If you find one of these and take it to pieces, and a hand lens or a magnifying glass is very useful when you're looking at plants, you'll find that those are actually 5 little petals. They are separate. The coloured bit is, the flat bit is called the limb, but underneath it, there's a white bit of tissue which joins it to where it joins the flower stalk, and that bit's called the claw. Don't worry too much about the words, but if you start reading books, you'll come across them. So there's the limbs of the petals, making that nice disc. This family are very popular with bees. They all produce a lot of nectar, and they're very quick to refresh that nectar after a bee's drunk it. So the bees keep coming to them. You'll see that in borage if you're in the herb garden. You'll see it on the green alkanet here. Green alkanet, by the way, because it was used as a dye plant at one point, produce a green dye. Comfrey belongs in the same family. It doesn't initially look like it because instead of the petals being flat like that, they hold them more as a trumpet, but the hairiness is the same. So borage family, jolly good for bees. Green alkanet, although it starts off in people's dye gardens, long ago escaped and is a well-established non-native plant. Doesn't do any harm. Now for the first of the really big families. So this is the cabbage family. And it used to be called the crucifers. Well, we still do call them crucifers, and that's crucifer is a cross shape. The taxonomists had a bit of a naming game a few years ago with families. So when you look at the paperwork, you'll see there's often two names quoted, new one, then old one. If you're using an older book, it's worthwhile having the older name. All of this family, the cabbage family, have 4 petals in a cross shape. They also have long pods with their seeds in, or fat pods, but some sort of pod for the seeds to be in. So 4 petals, 4 sepals, and pods for the seeds put you in the cabbage family. All cabbages have 4 petals and pods. There are some other flowers that have 4 petals. So 4 petals by itself doesn't mean you're in the cabbage family, but 4 petals and some pods does. With Wirral not mowing any of the grass verges for a couple of months, this is something called Cuckoo Flower, or Lady's Smock, or Milkmaids. Any of those English names will do. It's only about 20 centimetres high, 9 inches when it's fully grown. But it's popped up all over the places on the road verges. It's obviously been living there but not managing to flower most years for heaven knows how long. And with the no mowing, up it came. So a lot of it around Easton where I live. I know there's quite a lot around Thingwall because one of my recorders lives there. And then it's been recorded from Mells by another of our people. So very likely it's been around. It's just going over out of flower now. Wirral Borough Council is working on a programme to manage its road verges to be rather more friendly to pollinators, so letting them flower. It's very early stages, and this year was just meant to be 2 or 3 trial verges. And then COVID happened, and of course nothing was cut March, April, and they're just beginning to cut again. Now, some verges we have succeeded in getting, we hope, on the programme not to be cut until the end of June. Others, just because it's so difficult organising anything at the moment, will get cut this year, but we hope next year to have them onto a programme of not cutting till later, which will let the Cuckoo Flower and the Buttercups flower and seed and be used by all the insects before cutting. There's another set of verges up on the sand where we'll be looking for a different growing regime. But there's a cabbage. Now go on the sand dunes, and this is sea radish, which is another cabbage family. And you can see the 4 petal flowers easily enough. And your seed pods there, as you can see, are like a string of beads. They've got fat seeds in them, which are then constricted with each seed. So you get a series of knobbles. Bottom right hand corner is quite a good place for seeing the knobbles, which is going to do something again. Oh, he's found another way of bringing it forward. That's good. There you are. There's a whole seed of knobbles. Control the scroll wheel moves it. Splendid. What if I get back? I do the opposite? Yeah. Yeah. I've learned something this afternoon. These are big plants, sea radish. It's a close relation of the radish you eat in your salads. And same family, same genus. And you will easily find it on the sand dunes at Red Rocks, the Cheshire Wildlife Trust Nature Reserve, later in the year, which is where this photo was taken. Oops, I don't need to make it go. Why won't it go on, Richard?
All the way out.
Click on it. That's going next one. That's it. Smart one. Right, technical hitch here. And this is one of the cabbage family you'll find all sorts of places. This is oilseed rape. And again, you can see the 4 petal flowers, the seed pods just beginning to form. And look at the bracts. They they don't have a stem, they're clasping the main flower stem. And that's very characteristic of the actual Brassica genus, the cabbage genus itself, the one that has all the cabbages you eat in your garden, including broccoli and everything else. They're all cabbages. This photo, most of the photos I'm using today are mine, but this one and a few others have come from some of our trainee recorders who are learning their plants, who, since we can't meet up, have been sending me pictures for them to check ID. This one's one of June's, but there's also some of Susie's in here. This is a very good thing, and there are websites where you can send pictures to be identified. iNaturalist is one. The local records centre, whose contacts are on your paperwork record, they will identify from photographs. I will, but please don't send me too many, I'll get snowed under. When you are sending photographs of ID, something that gives an idea of scale is a good idea, even as here, as June did, just by putting it on your computer keyboard. Each of those little black tiles is about 1 centimetre across, so it makes it very easy to see the size. Anything else on the cabbages? Nope, that'll be. Next big family. This is the carrot family, and it's referred to as the umbellifers because if you look there in the middle, the flower has little spokes like an umbrella going up with the main flower stem where the handle would be. And then if you look at the flower in the middle, and I'm going to try this out. Yes, that's right, there we are. The top of the screen there, where there's one not quite out yet, you can see the main umbrella spokes, and each spoke has a mini umbrella at the top. And they're called partial umbels, but don't worry about the words, they're all on the paper. So with all carrot family, you've got big umbrella with little umbrellas on the top. There's another one. Let's get back to the, move it back again to get the other one. Bring that back, and I then go, yes, there we are. This is sweet Sicily, which is in my garden. It's, if you don't know sweet Sicily, it's a nice herb. The leaves are sweet and slightly aniseed flavoured, and you can cook them with something like rhubarb. Don't need so much sweetener with it if you cook these in. And the seeds, when they're green like this, you can chew them and they're a nice aniseed flavour. It's been grown in herb gardens for centuries. It's established as a wild plant, mostly a bit north of us. Perennial, looks after itself, comes back every year, so very easy. It'll grow happily in partial shade. And again, you can see the spokes of the umbrella, and you can see the spokes, the little umbrellas at the top. Now, where the main umbrella joins the stem, where the handle would be, there's often some green bits like that called bracts. And this is a wild carrot, and the bracts are particularly divided and obvious on that. If you then go close up, this is another wild carrot, you can see each little umbrella has also got green bits of tissue there, which are bracteoles. So bracts at the bottom where the main stem divides, and bracteoles at the bottom of each little group of flowers. And if you're looking in the books, sooner or later they'll ask you what's the shape of the bracts, what's the shape of the bracteoles. So that's where they are, that's where to go and look for them. Like all the umbellifers, very popular with insects. Flies and a beetle there. Nice flat flowers, good for fairly short-tongued things to feed on. There's a soldier beetle of some sort over there. Now, the umbellifers are one to be careful with. They include quite a lot of plants we eat, carrots and parsnips, ones we use for flavouring, like sweet Sicily and fennel and parsley, and several others, coriander, dill. They also include some of the most poisonous plants in the British flora. So if you're out and about foraging, don't pick up an umbellifer unless you're very sure what it is. if you find one with leaves rather like this, very divided, what we call pinnatophyid, but never mind the word, but the stem has got red blotches on it, then you've got hemlock. Don't eat it. It's what they use to kill Socrates. In wet places, we sometimes find one called hemlock water dropwort, and its roots look a bit like parsnips. They'll kill you in 5 hours. So say, do not go foraging for umbellifers without being very sure what they are. Fine if you grow in them in the garden and you know what you grew them from. So back to wild carrot, there we are. Now some little things, only because this grows everywhere. This is the chickweed family, sometimes called the pink family after the garden pinks. The chickweeds are little low-growing white-flowered things. This is mouse ear, and if you look at those leaves, they're hairy, unlike little ears, so a reasonably sensible name. And there are small white flowers, which are usually 5-petaled, but those 5 are often divided. I'm going to try and take this in, yes, to a certain extent. The one at the top of the screen, you can see ones, and each petal has a notch in it, which can be quite a deep notch, so sometimes they look as though they've got 10 petals, particularly in the stitchworts. Mouse ear, this one grows almost anywhere. It's got a sticky version that grows on the heathlands and sometimes on the sand dunes. Looks very similar, but when you touch it, it feels sticky. I'm going to pull that back so I can get to there, yes. And there's a whole group of stitchworts and mouse ears. So to start off with, just recognise you've got mouse ears if they're hairy and stitchworts if they're not. But red campion belongs to the same family. And there you can see how the petals are deeply notched. So there's 5 petals, but they're so notched it looks as if you've got 10. Red campion, ooh, good, anything up to 1 metre tall, usually a bit less. So shade tolerant, edge of woods, shady hedgerows, very common plant. Ignore the yellow flowered one for the moment, we'll come back to that. Red campion's an unusual one because unlike most plants which have male and female parts in the same flower, this one has separate male and female plants. So when you go to a red campion, feel the sepals just behind the flower. The sepals are joined together, fused into a tube with just the tips free. If when you feel behind the flower there, it feels thin, it's a male. If you can feel a good lump inside those sepals, then you've got the female because the seeds are developing there. Quite a few trees have separate male and female, willows, poplars, holly, but it's unusual in herbaceous plants. The other common one is stinging nettle, which I'm sure you all know, so there's no point putting a picture of that up. That actually has separate male and female plants, each one forming a patch. But red campion, easy to find. It's got a white relative, not as common. It's got a relative with very divided raggedy petals called ragged robin, pink like this one. So they're quite an easy group to get to know, look out for. Now, particularly on the sand dunes, there are quite a lot of this family. Cranesbill, see the seed pod? Or top left-hand corner, see the seed pods? Like a bird's long beak, as a crane or a stork would have. Cranesbills and storksbills, normally called. 5-petaled, and you can see the stamens and the stigma sticking out the front. Leaves are usually lobed and cut like that. This is taken in my garden, and behind are the big leaves of another one of this genus, the Meadow Cranesbill. Isn't flowering yet. This one is Herb Robert, little annual of shady places, hedgerows, edges of woods, that sort of thing. Very hairy, as you can see, and smells a bit sort of mousy. So quite distinctive. That's another one which you might find around hedgerows, particularly in South Wirral actually. This is the Hedgerow Cranesville. You can see the dark lines on the flowers, which are known as honey guides. They're supposed to show the insects where to go to get the nectar. That one was only just out in my garden, and no, this wasn't taken in the garden, it's taken somewhere else. Not actually got any seed pods on yet. But cranesbills are easy. If you're on the sand dunes, there's the close relations called the storksbills. Same family, different genus, which again you can recognise by the long seed pods. I think you all know what that is. That one anyway, the daisy. The ordinary common lawn daisy that's all over the place, and again has enjoyed having the road verges not cut, although mostly the mothers go over it anyway. This is the daisy family, and that isn't one flower. That's round about 100 flowers. I'll put a bigger one on. This is the Oxide Daisy, and excuse the thick-legged flower beetle. I found that quite a few of my flower close-up photographs have got an insect in the middle. That's the male. The female doesn't have those swollen thighs and is brown. They're very much out at the moment. Look for them as you're going round. So here's the big daisy, Oxide Daisy. And there's two sorts of flowers in that. There's the ones with a long petal, which make the attractive flower and attract the insects. On the Oxeye and the daisy, other daisies, that actually is sterile. It doesn't have the male and female plants. The yellow ones in the middle, the little tubular flowers, they're the ones that do the business. They have the pollen and the stigmas and make the seeds. So this beetle is happily trolling around there to eat some pollen. Now, the family includes ones like this, which have tubular ones in the middle and flat ones around the outside. Also, like the dandelion, where all the flowers have got a long petal. There's a name for them, but look for that when you look at the paperwork. And also there are ones which only purely have the tubular flowers, so no flat petals at all, like groundsel or pineapple weed. Dandelions are very good early nectar and pollen sources, as that peacock butterfly is enjoying. And so there's a very good reason for letting dandelions to flower in your garden or on the road verges. But don't let them seed too freely or they'll take over everything. Now, because each one of these is a group of flowers, what on any other plant would be sepals, these green things here have a different name. They're called phyllories. There's green with little black tips. And again, when you're going down books, sooner or later, you'll find the word, it's on the paperwork, and say, oh yes, it's those green things there I've got to look at. So this is ragwort, common ragwort, extremely good insect plant. Something well over 120 species of insect feed on it for nectar and pollen, and 20 plus species of insect depend on it, including that lovely black and yellow caterpillar, which is the cinnabar moth. The adult's red and black, just flying at the moment. Find the caterpillars in a few weeks' time. Ragwort is a native species. It naturally grows on the sand dunes and on the heathlands and other disturbed sandy soils. Yes, it is poisonous to horses and other animals. Horses have quite a degree of sense, and they won't eat it when it's green. Smell it and you'll see why. The trouble is, when it's dried in hay, they will eat it. And because it's a cumulative liver poison, a slow drip over years, and horses are long-lived animals, eventually damages the liver, and by the time they show symptoms, it's too late to do anything. The other danger, apart from hay, is that grazing in fields, if you leave ragwort growing, end of the year, like any other plant, the bottom leaves start to die off and drop down, and then the horses will eat them. And so again, there's the drip of poison. So with ragwort, the rule is get it out of horse and other grazing fields, get it out of hay, check hay when you're feeding it to make sure there isn't any dried ragwort in it. It's quite easy to recognise. And then it's fine. But anywhere else, please leave it for the insects because they need it. That's black and yellow caterpillar. They used to be everywhere. But that species has declined seriously in the last 20 years, even in the last 10 years. And we do need to look after our insects. We know that since 1970, the amount of insects that are around have declined by about 3/4, with inevitable knock-ons on pollination, on food for birds, on food for bats, on food for spiders, and on food for predatory insects. We've got to start looking after our insects. Right, I need to turn my piece of paper over, that's better. Dock family. You probably know a dock when you see one. This is actually sorrel, common sorrel, which is a hay meadow plant, but found in all sorts of grasslands. Leaves clasping around the stem, and not much to look at of a way of a flower. In fact, they don't have separate petals and sepals. They just have one set of little structures, which somebody some years ago decided would be a good idea to call tepals. So docks have tepals. They're much easier to identify when they're in seed because those tepals develop little wavy edges or knobs on them of all sorts. But you're probably familiar with the two common docks, the broad-leaved one and the curled dock, which has long wavy leaves. There are several more, and there's two sorrel species. Plus, in your garden, you might well have French sorrel as a herb. If you don't, that's another one that's worth exploring. If you've got a herb bed, I'm very sure you've got this family. This is the mint family. And if you go to your herb bed and pick mint, lavender, sage, rosemary, marjoram, thyme, which is this one, you'll find they've all got square stems, which you can see on the right-hand side of the picture quite well. And all the mint family have square stems. There are square stems in other families, like the figworts and one or a few others. So don't automatically assume a square stem is a mint family. You go again, got to look at the flowers. Now, up till now, flowers we've been looking at, they've been radially symmetrical. All directions. This one is bilaterally symmetrical. Again, I'm going to bring it, there we are, up so you can see a bit more detail. If you put a line from top to bottom down the flower, it's symmetrical either side. What you've actually got is 2 petals fused at the top, sometimes with a notch, and 3 petals at the bottom, which are fused most of the way, but divide into 3 lobes. But the important thing is, put line down the middle, it's symmetrical either side. So square stems and a flower that's bilaterally symmetrical, and you're in the mint family. And there are wild ones as well as all the herbs. There's woundwort and self-heal and the wild versions of marjoram. And if you're up on the limestone or short chalk soils, there's a whole load more. But get to know them in your herb bed. A lot of them are aromatic, have scents of various sorts. The function of the scents from as far as the plant is concerned is to make it unpalatable for things to eat it. But we actually like the taste of some of them, so we use them as flavouring. Or in the case of lavender, for scenting. Make scented sachets to put in the wardrobe or whatever else. You can use lavender in cooking, but only use small amounts. It easily overpowers. We will not know. Whoopsie daisy. Let's get yourself back moving again. Oops, it's decided not to move again, which is why isn't it moving in? Which you do last time.
I came out of full screen.
So,
moved on back to full screen.
right, this is why I've got Richard handy, is for when the technology doesn't do what I expect. Orchids. You're used to seeing them in the garden centres. We do have them wild. This is taken on Port Sunlight River Park, which if you don't know, do go and explore. The old landfill site at Bromber, Port Sunlight, right on the Mersey coast. Splendid view from the top. Open to the public. Orchids are a very strange family. They're mostly tropical. There's the flower in close-up. We've got 3 what are actually bracts at the back, again called tepals. You've got a lip in front, which is often a funny shape. In this case, it's pretending to be a bee. And then there are other bits of petal making the other lobes, and the business part, the stamens and sepals, stamens and anthers, are underneath that green bit there. Bee orchids, that is actually pretending to be a certain species of bee. And in Europe, the right bee occurs, and the male comes and tries and mates with that shape. It's attracted by the shape and also by the scent. We can't smell it, but they can. And in trying to mate with the flower, it gets pollen nobbled on its head, which it then flies off to another flower, and that pollen gets on the stigma of the next one. We haven't got the right bee in this country, so our bee orchids have to fertilise themselves. They pop up strange places sometimes. They like open, disturbed soils with a bit of calcium in the soil from mortar or brick or whatever. And like all orchids, they produce loads of dust-like seeds, which then blow around in the wind. And if they're very lucky, land in the right place, they join up with a fungus in the soil. And for the first 2 to 3 years, they live on the fungus as a parasite. Then the orchid starts putting up green leaves, and it becomes a more mutual arrangement with the orchid supplying sugars to the fungus and the fungus supplying other nutrients to the orchid. And they eventually come to flower. It takes them anywhere from 3 to 6 years to get the flowering size. The bee orchids die after flowering, so you never find them in the same place twice. Some of the other orchids, like these marsh orchids, are perennials, so as we do. This is Northern Marsh Orchid. Again, we're looking at something about 20 centimetres tall, with tepals at the back and a divided lip at the front. The tendency in this species to fold back the lips, and the very dark purple. Northern Marsh Orchid grows from North Wales northwards. There is a Southern Marsh Orchid, which grows from Lancashire southwards, so we're in the overlap zone and we get both. Southern Marsh is usually paler coloured than this, and there are some differences which are quite difficult. There's also something called Common Spotted Orchid, which has spots on the leaves. Trouble is, Common Spotted and Southern Marsh hybridize very easily, and as quite often happens in flowers, that hybrid is fertile, so it will cross back to either species, and you get what botanists call, but we've got Common Spotted, Southern Marsh, and everything in between. If you go down Prenton Dell, you can find exactly that. Also, New Fay Butterfly Park, which we are hoping to get open on Sunday afternoons in June. Again, we've got a hybrid swarm of the marsh orchids. Don't pick them, please. They are really uncommon. Do take the book to the plant and take photographs. The other place to go is Prenton Dell. That's got both Northern Marsh and Southern Marsh and Common Spotted and everything in between. This photo is actually taken at Williston, where there's a paddock which is maintained by its owners for nature. It's next to the footpath from the Pollard Inn down to the Wirral Way. So if you stroll along there in June on your exercise and look over the fence, you can see these. And it really is a sight, because there's hundreds, if not thousands of them. Next really big family. I think you all know a pea. At least I'm sure you're used to eating peas and beans. And hopefully you also know what the flower looks like from things like sweet peas in the garden. 2 petals fused at the back make what's called the standard. In the middle, there are 2 petals enclosing the business part, And then either side of that, there's a little petal, and they're called wings. The middle's called the keel. The next petals are called the wings. The one at the back is called the standard. So right, all those words are on the paperwork. This is common vetch. There's the plant growing itself. 1 or 2 flowers at each node where the leaf joins the stem. Very often leaves divided into leaflets. Quite often, if you look right at the left of the screen, a tendril which clings onto something. Think of your peas growing in the garden. My Monge too have just come into flower. A big family, but with a very distinctive flower shape, so you can always tell you've got a pea. That's another vetch, that's tufted vetch, which will flower a bit later. The flowers in tufts, that's pretty easy to remember that one. And again, if you look carefully at the flowers, you'll find the standard at the back. And the wings and keel, very often the wings are folded closely onto the keel, making the lump in the front. If you're up on the sand dunes, there's loads of this, and on the sandy verges around Mells and Hoylake at the moment. The books call it bird's foot trefoil from the seed pods, but it's got lots of country names. And particularly when it's growing in dry places, this is on the Butterfly Park on Railway Ballast, you often get it with the buds orange and the flowers yellow. So this is bacon and eggs. A friend of mine calls it Mum's Purse. Somebody else calls it Lady's Slipper. So lots of country names to it. Very important plant. It's the food plant for the caterpillars of the common blue butterfly, all 3 Burnet moths and the Burnet companion moth. Butterfly caterpillars are choosy. Usually they'll only eat 1 or 2 species, so the female's very careful where she lays her eggs. Moths are not quite as choosy, but they are fairly choosy. Again on the sand dunes, particularly on the stretch from Red Rocks itself down towards West Kirby, which is a Cheshire Wildlife Trust Nature Reserve. Go and look for this one. A couple of weeks' time yet before it'll be out. Again, standard shape for the pea family. Standard at the back, wings and keel in the middle. This one's all hairy, round. It's known as kidney vetch. At one time it was used for kidney complaints, but modern herbalists don't use that. Or lady's fingers. And if you look at the leaves, they're long and thin with a little point on the top. Imagine the 18th century lady who never did any work. Clovers belong to the same family. You'll probably have to take your magnifying glass to look at the flower shape on a clover, but you'll find it's exactly the same. Red clover here, of course, common in the verges, as is white clover. If you've got it in your garden, white or red, leave the mower off for a while to let it flower. The bees will love you. All of the pea family, they have nodules on their roots, little lumps, which have bacteria inside them, which fix nitrogen from the air into a soluble form that the plants can take up. So they're vitally important to soil fertility. For the same reason, their pollen is particularly rich in protein. Pollen is protein supply to feed growing larvae of bees or any other insect. Nectar is energy, it's sugar solution basically. They need both. And particularly with the bumblebees, which are active for a long time, they need nectar and pollen from when the overwintered queens come out in Aprilish to when the new queens are raised by the nest in July, August. And look around your garden, your area, your parks, whatever. See if there's flowers all the time through that period from April to September. Because if there's a patch where it's nice and green, but there aren't any flowers, the bumblebees are going to struggle in that patch. So continuity of nectar and pollen is very important. And there are a couple of trees and shrubs in the family as well. That's broom, but the gorse on the heathlands is also a pea family. And all the pea family have pods. You're used to peas in pods, and sure, beans in pods. Well, they've all got pods of some sort. Little family, the plantains, but a very easy one too. to recognise. Leaves in a flat rosette. This is Mugwort, so they're sticking up a bit, but greater plantains sit them on the ground. Flowers don't go in for petals. They're minute or non-existent. What you can see there, you can see the ring of stamens, the anthers, shading pollen. The whitish bits above them are where the female stigmas are, but mostly have gone over by now. And the little stars underneath are the sepals. And maybe you had the childhood game of knotting the stem round the bottom of the flower head and firing it at your mates. That's a northern game. I didn't know that in Oxfordshire. I only learnt it up here. There are a couple of seaside plantains. So if you're on the sand dunes, there's one called buckshorn plantain with leaves a bit like an antler, and there's one called sea plantain with smooth ones. So recognise the flower shape. You can also find the plantains. Right, big family. We're getting towards the end now. Rose family. Yeah, you all know a rose. This is the sand dune rose, the Burnet rose. Very pretty and has big black hips when they're ripe. 5 petals, very obvious. 5 sepals. If you look at the right-hand side of the picture, you can see some of the sepals. Lots of stamens. And a disc or little raised area in the middle, which has all the ovules on it, the female part of the flower. If you look just to the right of centre, you can see that there is a hip beginning to develop, and all the business part, the petals and sepals and stamens, are on top of that hip area. So the ovary, which is in the hip part, is an inferior ovary because it's underneath the rest. Inferior and superior used to mean something slightly different a couple of centuries ago when botanists devised their names. Roses are a very big family. They include your brambles and your hawthorns, your apple, all your big fruit, most of your soft fruit. They're all in the same family. My brambles hadn't quite come out when I was assembling these pictures, so this is actually loganberry, which is a raspberry blackberry cross. But the same with 5 petals, 5 sepals, all of the anthers in the middle, and you can see to the left of the picture that the ovules are already swelling and forming the fruit, and of course the seeds are inside that. They're not all thorny, it's just that quite a few of our garden ones are. There are little flowers as well, so this is Wood Avens, which is the yellow one that was growing with the red campion before. 5 petals, 5 sepals, lots of stamens, and a lump in the middle with the ovules. This is a woodland edge plant, hedgerows, slightly shady area. The seeds have little hooked bristles on them, so they're very good at hooking themselves onto a passing fox, dog, people's trousers, falling off somewhere else and growing on. So, a couple of easy genera to finish with. Small but very recognisable families. This is St. Johnswort. St. Johnsworts because they all come out round about midsummer, and St. John's Day is the 24th of June. The perforate St. Johnswort you may have heard of. It's the one that's used as a herbal medicine, antidepressant and things. One you have to be very careful about combining with prescription drugs. It can interact. They all have 5 petaled yellow flowers, 5 sepals. The stamens, if you look at one closely, when they come out in a couple of weeks, are in little bunches. And in the middle, if you look to just below the left, then you can see the ovule in the centre. It's got a long style and stigma sticking out. That ovule is on top of all the petals and sepals. So that's a superior ovary. It's more fun for the names than that. Very often the St. Johnsworts have little black lobs, little black marks on the edges of the leaves or on the petals. This one doesn't have them on the petals, but quite a few do. They're little glands. They're useful when you're trying to identify them, because it's very easy to recognise a St. Johnswort. The flower shape and the little black marks and things. Oh yes, I've got a St. Johnswort. Oh dear, which one have I got? Well, learn to recognise a genus before you worry about that. This actually is square stem St. Johnswort. It's a marsh plant. Do take note of habitats. When you're looking up species in the books or on the apps, they'll always say what their main habitats are. And if it says it grows in marshes, but you're standing on a sand dune, then you might have not be the species you think it is. If it says it grows on a high mountain and you're in Wirral, then it's certainly not the species you think you've got. You've gone wrong somewhere. That's particularly important if you're using these identification apps, which are pretty primitive still at the moment and don't by any means always give you the right answer. They often give you 3 or 4 choices. Well, do look at the habitats and rule out the ones that certainly aren't going to be growing. It has to be said, plants sometimes grow in funny places. They don't always read the books, but it's a good guide as to what habitat they're growing in. Speedwells, another genus that's indeed family that's very easy to recognise as a speedwell, rather more difficult to work out which one you've got. This is Germander speedwell. It's a strange name. Germander means grows in clearings, a word we don't use except as a plant name now. Most of them are blue. There's some pink ones as well, with flowers that are actually 2-lipped, although each lip is divided, so it looks as though it's got 4. But when you take one to bits, you find it's actually in 2 parts. Toadflax is belong to the same family. So does Foxglove. Now, we didn't think Foxglove did, but when the DNA work started coming on the genetics, it was found that Foxglove was actually more closely related to the speedwells than to where it had been in the figwort family. So it moved. Quite a lot of speedwells in your lawn, in the garden. This is on the edge of my somewhat disorganised herb bed. Just going over now, almost out of flower, this particular one, but some of the other species will be in flower later. There's a heath speedwell occasionally found on the heaths and at Royden Park. And finally, willow herbs. Very distinctive genus and family with a long seed pod. But when it's in flower, that flower is actually sitting on the edge of what is already that long pod. So all your business part, sepals, petals, and the sexual parts are on the end of the long stalk, which is actually not a stalk, it's a developing pod. Again, it's got a name, which doesn't matter. It's on your paperwork. Eventually, that pod will ripen, will split, and will release little seeds with feathery plumes on them, like a dandelion has, which blow around. This one is great hairy willow herb, which is exactly that. Can easily be up to nearly 2 meters tall, hairy leaved, hairy stemmed, marsh and damp soil plant, spreads by runners.
Thank you.
Jolly good bee plant. If you look at the top left-hand corner, you can see the stigma sticking out, and you can see it's lobed. It's got 4, it divides into about 4. If you're using a key to the willow herbs, then that's one of the questions it'll immediately ask you. Is the stigma 4-lobed like that, or is it club-shaped? Keys are the way botanists get things from a general, yes, it's that genus, down to the species. And the way they work, you'll see certainly in the books and on most of the apps, the proper identification apps, not the ones that go by pictures, is that they will have pairs of descriptions, and you read the 2 descriptions, and one of them will match to your plant, and it'll tell you to go to another number. And you go to that number, and there's another pair of descriptions, and you take the right one, and eventually it ends up with a species. Now, they take a bit of getting used to. So if you're using a book or a website that's new to you, start off with something you know what it is and key that down and see if you get the right place. And if you don't, go back and see where it's gone wrong, because they all have their ways of describing things and referring to things, and it takes a little bit of getting used to the author's way of doing it. But they are absolutely essential for getting to know the more detailed plants. Again, lots of willow herbs, easy to recognise you've got a willow herb, rather more difficult to tell which one you've got, although this is the easy one, the great hairy one. Rosebay willow herb, same family, not the same genus, has its leaves in whorls rather than the pairs that this one has. But again, same flower structure, very easy to tell a willow herb. Now that's where I'm going to stop screen share and hopefully, and come back and we can start a question and answer session. Let's find out where we.
Thank you for that absolutely incredible talk, and I completely enjoyed every second of it. It was, yeah, it was absolutely brilliant. The most fascinating thing for me was the life cycle of the orchids, which I'm now completely obsessed with and will research, because that was one of the most interesting things I've ever heard, that they've got a symbiotic relationship with a specific fungus. Absolutely incredible. The question I'd like to ask is about brassicas. I know with the orchids you mentioned about hybridization, but I'm wondering because I got told about brassicas hybridizing, but I noticed myself in the garden that these strange plants that look like brassicas have been coming up. I was like, what's that? I mean, is it possible to grow brassicas and use the seeds, or because of the potential for hybridization, will it ever be true to its parent plants?
Now, if you're in a garden situation and you've got things like purple sprouting, white sprouting, cauliflower, cabbage, if you let those seed, the bees will spread the pollen around, and what you get will probably not be pure to what you started with.
But will it always be edible though? Could you?
Oh yes, it'll be edible. Now, oilseed rape is one subspecies. You won't find oilseed rape crossing with your garden cabbages, but you will find your different sorts of garden cabbages crossing with each other. You can perfectly well, yes, grow them and you'll get loads of seed and you can grow the seed, but you may not get actually quite. Or you can just sprout the seed for sprouting seed and use it in salad. Perfectly good for that.
Thank you, Hilary. Right, who else would like to ask a question? Pete, have you got any questions?
Gillian's waving a hand.
Okay, I'll just ask Pete first and then Gillian can come second.
Right. You're going to unmute him.
He's saying Australian.
He's saying Australian. Okay. Well, unmute Gillian then.
Okay, Gillian.
Right. Thanks, Hilary. I look after a community flower bed and I ought to make sure that some of these things that are growing in it are not nasty for the kids or their pets. Any idea what this is?
Oh, it's Phacelia. It's a green manure, very useful in the garden for improving the soil, but it's not edible, no. So you actually don't want that in there.
It's not going to do any harm to people though, is it?
It's not poisonous, but I don't think they'd like the taste of it. I grow it in the allotments as a green manure, and the bees absolutely adore it. So I leave it for them to flower until I actually need that bit of ground to plant out crops. So yeah, it's a borage family, and it's Phacelia, Phacelia.
Okay. And then there's this really weird thing. It has purpley flowers when it's in flower.
Right, Richard is trying to enlarge it for me. Ah, that's better. It is a weird thing, isn't it?
I'll try and show you a bit of leaf.
Well, I think that's the Phacelia gone to seed.
Right, it curls round though. It goes big, really curly.
That's Phacelia. Show me your other one again, and I'll just check it is the same thing.
These are rounder, and the other one goes in
a
curl.
I think it is if it's not the same thing, it's a close relation. It's the same grouping.
Right, okay. Again, it's not nasty or
harmful. They're not nasty, but they're not actually edible. Well, not particularly. Oh, purple toadflax. Oh, lovely. Yes, it's not edible, but it won't poison anybody. This is a close relation of your antirrhinums in the garden.
and then there's this weird thing. It hasn't come in flower yet.
Ooh, that's more. I'm not so sure what that is.
I think it has tiny white flowers when it does come out.
It's an orache. It's yes. Oh, that's a funny word. Orache. Orache. Now, some of the genus are edible. Some of them, they won't poison you, but they're just distasteful. There's
Okay,
quite a lot of relations of it.
So these are good for the bees. I should leave them.
They're good for the bees. Yes.
Yeah.
Leave those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay, has anyone got a question they may not want to ask, but just put in the chat? So if you've got a question, I know Beverly earlier asked if I think we were talking about Sweet Sicily you were talking about Sweet Sicily at the time. Yeah. Is that possible to grow that in pots? She asked.
You'd need quite a big pot. It's a full-size perennial. It's probably about 1 meter tall, and it makes a big plant. So you would need a big pot because it's got a big root system. It needs to have room. But in principle, yes, but you would need a big pot.
Is there anyone who wants to put something in the chat or wants to ask a question verbally? Pete?
Unmute him. He's muted at the moment.
He needs to do it. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, you mentioned trainee recorders earlier on. I just wanted you to say more about that, how you become a trainee recorder.
Oh, right. Well, it's not a formal thing in some ways. Wirral Wildlife, which is the Wirral bit of Cheshire Wildlife Trust, and which is the bit that I'm an officer for, Honorary Conservation Officer. We've run a recording team for, well, it's even before I'm involved, it must be 40 years now, who are volunteers, mixture of amateur and professional, who literally go and write down what's living on sites. Now, we've got quite a lot of us do plants, butterflies. We link up with the birding societies for people to do birds, and some of our people do birds. Few do insects of various sorts. And our main role is that in Wirral we've got 12 nationally important sites of special scientific interest. That includes just about all the coast, and something over 70 local wildlife sites, which are locally important. And then sometimes there are other sites like parks that people ask us to look at. The triple SIs and the local wildlife sites, we try and look at them once every 10 years. That doesn't apply to the estuaries because the birders look after those and count the birds every year. But the terrestrial ones we do. So we have a selection of sites each year we're going to go and look at. Of course, it's all on hold at the moment, but we hope to get back to recording certainly by August. And we've always made a habit of simply taking people along with us who'd like to learn, because formal courses and introductory courses like this, more formal courses like the Field Studies Council runs in normal times, they will all teach you to learn, but one of the best things is to go out with somebody who knows and just go around with them, and they'll keep saying, this is that, and that's why it's that. Oh dear, I've got to look at the book for this one. And so normally I'd be going around with 2 or 3 trainees in tow as I'm doing sites. Hopefully by next year we can get back to this one. Other organisations will do similar things. The World Museum in Liverpool has schemes, particularly at the moment they're working with the Taniptera Trust and doing things on invertebrates. Record, the Cheshire Record Centre, which has its office at Chester Zoo, they have schemes where they take out people as well. These contacts are on the, they're on with the books, the ID books, so on the end of that sheet when you look at your paperwork. So yes, the best way to go around. Similarly, the birders, they will take people out and teach them to recognise birds and how on earth they count them.
So is all this information sort of like kept in a central place, so that, as a sort of research and things, yeah? Yeah,
well, there's several things. There are specialist societies like Butterfly Conservation, who we feed records to.
Yeah.
The Record Centre, each area's got one, so there's a North Merseyside one, Merseyside Biobank, and there's a Cheshire one, which includes Wirral, because as far as the insects and what plants are concerned, we're part of Cheshire. and that takes Cheshire records, and then all those local ones feed to the national one. So there's a National Biodiversity Network, NBN, National Biodiversity Network. If you Google that one up, you get the national one, and you can pull up maps of where things live. And if you go to Records website, which is on the sheet, then you can look at Cheshire Records Centre. Then you can pull up the Cheshire maps and see where things live and where they've been recorded. And you can do that for certain dates or going back for a long time or whatever.
Okay, are they around just like sort of nature reserves, or are they?
That can be anywhere.
It can be anywhere,
including your garden.
So it could be in the street outside, or
yes.
Yeah.
What a record is a plant or animal that you've managed to recognise and put a species name on, a date, where it is, preferably a grid reference for that, and your name as the recorder, and that's what constitutes a record. Now these records are very useful to planning when we're, as we are at the moment, tied up with a rural local plan, trying to decide where buildings should go and where buildings shouldn't go. They're very useful to climate change scientists and other researchers who are looking how things are changing. They're used by consultants who are working for planning firms to look up and say, oh dear, you better not do it there. Or more likely, when we build on that, we're going to have to be careful because there's something else nearby and we have to make sure we don't harm it. So they're very useful records, and anybody can put one in. Say, all you need to know is be pretty well sure you've got the species, or send them a photograph to confirm, and the place, the date, and the name, your name. Okay. And that's what makes it. So yes, do explore that side of things.
Okay.
Has anyone else got a question for Hilary? Okay, I've got one, Hilary. I recently, one of my fave plants at the moment is Mugwort and the Wormwood family, Artemisius. Am I saying that right? And I read that the Romans had actually had planted it here because they considered it a culinary plant. And I know it's got other uses for teas. I enjoy Mugwort tea. Could you tell me more about that? I mean, did the Romans plant, plants that I might perceive as indigenous, are they actually planted a long time ago by Romans? Is there more than that, or is that indeed true? Is that?
I'm going to check Mugwort up. Mugwort itself, there's a group of the Mugworts. Mugwort itself, I am just checking up as to when it comes in. Botanists sort of group plants by ones that we think, from pollen evidence mostly, finding pollens in lake sediments and peats, put themselves in after the last ice age. We count those as natives.
Wow.
Ones that have been here a long time, pre-1600, so yes, might have come in with people coming back after the ice age, or the Romans or the Normans. They're called archaeophytes. And then what's arrived more recently, 1600. Ordinary mugwort is an archaeophyte. It's been here for a very long time. Probably might have been brought in as a flavouring, might have been brought in just accidentally. Plants move around on people's feet and with agricultural stuff and seed and all sorts. Absinthe Wormwood, which is another of the mugwort genus, is another one that was definitely brought in originally to...
So does wormwood grow wild then as well?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Wormwood occasionally grows wild. Where did I found it on the shore at Red Rocks near the Natterjack Scrapes the other year. I don't know if it's still there because...
Is it possible, because I grew some wormwood from seed in the garden, would that be possible, or hybridised with the mugwort plant? Is that...
No, it shouldn't. No, there's no hybrids. I've got one of the really complicated books here. There's no hybrids listed for that, so I think no, they should stay separate. Mugwort itself, of course, is a common wayside weed. Weed is a plant in the wrong place, but some plants are just good at growing in disturbed habitats. So mugwort's a disturbed habitat plant. Wormwood, rarely escapes in this area, but does occasionally. So yes, but they won't hybridise, no.
Okay,
And you can tell the difference by the smell. They smell different.
Andy, have you got a question?
Well, this
Hello,
year,
Andy.
do I need to? No. This year, for the first time, because I dug over my board, I've got a load of Oxide Daisies coming.
Oh, good.
And they look really nice. But that's to be encouraged, though, would you say?
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, they're nice. They are one of the plants at seed bank, so the seed was probably in the soil from years ago, and when you disturbed it, they all came up. Yeah, very good plant for beetles and flies and almost anything else that wants pollen to feed on. So by all means, they're a short-lived perennials, so they'll grow and flower for a few years, and then those individual plants will die. But if you disturb the border, they'll come up again.
Yes,
Yeah,
so, I'm really enjoying. Yeah, I'm really enjoying them.
Yeah, they're nice. Very good.
Cute. They're cute. It's fascinating that I noticed that in the greenhouse when we dig, and we got a lot of nightshade plants that formerly weren't there, and I realised that they'd been in the soil and it hadn't been dug for 14 years. It wouldn't have been there, so I was surprised how long seeds last. But I think you learn so much from actually doing things and talking to people like you. I mean, I learned so much then. But if I was reading a book, I'd try and learn it, but it'd be difficult for me to learn like that. I'm better learning experientially, or someone actually telling me. But sometimes when you do something like that, you make that discovery and you're like, wow. And it really stays in your mind because it's an experience that you've had. Corin, have you got any questions?
Unmute yourself. Unmute up.
I was only going to ask about the plant behind me. I can show you a picture of where it's growing. If you just hang on. I'll have to put it in the background again because I'm not sure how to put this up. There.
See your nails up, Corin. My spread nails.
Look, there.
Yeah,
it's growing up to the ground and it's going into the plants. There's two magpies, by the way, that decided to take over the bird bath. Won't let anybody else in it.
Is it? Am I right in thinking it's a sort of a mauvey daisy shape? Daisy.
I don't know what it is. It just grows out the ground and it's sort of crept up into this plant.
Well, if you imagine a daisy mauve instead of yellow and white, I think it's probably that sort of thing. Right, it's now Erigeron. What are they having for the Latin name is Erigeron, and I'm looking to see whether it's got whether it's got an English name that's
I've tried taking a bit out and planting it in a pot, but it just dies. It just likes the ground, doesn't like.
Yeah, it's you probably have to get quite a long way down to get the roots. It's in the fleabane group, but the fleabanes include little yellowy things that grow in all sorts of cracks, and a whole set what we now use as garden plants. And that's one of the ones that's a garden plant originally. Seaside Daisy is another name for the group.
Right.
And it's widely escaped onto walls and places around North Wirral. When I go to Manor Road Station and walk up to, because we've got a meeting in the community centre at Hoyle Road, then I pass a whole lot on those walls. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if it's found its way into your garden if you're up that end.
A little backyard all the way in Boothfield,
So yes, it's a reasonably...
Alison, have you got any questions you'd like, Alison Joseph? You need to unmute yourself.
No, I haven't.
All right.
Would you like to make any comments?
Well, I would have liked, about 30 years ago, I did work experience for a company called Landlife, which were based in Lark Lane, Liverpool at the time.
Yeah, I know Landlife.
Yeah, and I would have liked to, been to talks like this because it would have been an extra interest.
Yeah,
so that you could actually know what they were working with, and
Landlife went on to move to Courtay Park and become quite an active organisation, doing very good work in habitat creation. And
Yeah.
they actually ran into financial problems and closed
Ah,
a few years ago.
ah,
Now,
shame.
Richard Scott, who did a lot of the wildflower work, and I've worked
Yeah,
with
no,
for
Richard, yeah.
40, 30 plus years. How old are you? 36, 33 years. He was doing a lot of work on planting wildflowers in the urban areas.
Yeah.
And that work has been picked up by the Eden Project. And they are
Wow.
actually funding Richard to keep that work going.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not all the seed production was lost. The name of Land Life Wildflower Seed has been bought up by one of the big companies, and they're not growing it in St Helens anymore. But the work on the urban wildflowers is going on with Eden Project. Now, I hope Eden Project isn't going to run into big financial problems. This year is difficult for everything like that. But they have been funding it. And he's got a sort of desk in the museum, the World Museum in Liverpool, which he works out of. So, yeah, some of the work is carrying on.
I liked the way Alison was showing appreciation for this talk as well. And yeah, I mean, it's great doing practical. I'm a very practical person, but I love theory as well. And I think the way Hilary's explained things today has made it so digestible for me. And I've learned so much. So I really appreciate that too. Heather, have you got any questions or comments you'd like to make?
No, I found it really useful to kind of understand how the different families all kind of relate to each other and everything, but no, I've not got any questions.
Yeah, I found that very interesting as well, and some things were in families that I wouldn't have expected as well, which don't really. The Foxglove one blew my mind.
Well, that was everybody's surprise, that one,
because they didn't really look the same, but as you said, like the genetic evidence. So that was really fascinating. So thank you, Heather. Liz, would you have got any comments you'd like to make?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Liz.
I just found it very interesting, thank you. We've been doing quite a lot of walking locally and wondering what the flowers were, so it'll make it a bit easier to find them and decide what we've seen.
Yeah, I think that's perfect on this one. Keep practicing.
Yes.
So
thank you very much, Hilary. It's very interesting.
That's a really good point as well, because when we go on walks, I think it makes it a more enriching and enjoyable experience if we can name and notice these plants. And that's why I think Hilary's talk today is so fabulous. I'm hoping that she'll let us put it on YouTube, maybe on the Earth Move site, and then I can send everyone the link and we can put Hilary's details there. So I'll ask her that afterwards. So, Martin, have you got any questions or comments?
No questions. I just appreciated recognising by families, which is usually I find a wildflower somewhere I don't recognise them, but trying to actually find it in a book, if it's graded by colour or something like that, is very difficult, and I usually end up with one that's only ever been found once in Cornwall or something like that. No, thank you very much. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah, it was good, wasn't it? Robert, have you got any questions or comments you'd like to share with Hilary and the group? I think you need to unmute yourself.
Yes. Thank you very much, Hilary. Really an eye-opener for me today in terms of now, going on that path where I can start to identify what's in and around the garden, various places. And enjoyed it immensely.
Me too.
And the formation of these plants and the different parts of them and how they're relating. Linking, I really enjoyed the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you everyone.
Can Gillian come in, because she was going to tell us a bit about weed removal policy in the council.
Okay.
And I was asked a question about that the other day, so I want to hear what Gillian can tell me.
Okay.
Hey, Colin Clayton has had a bit of a turnaround. So the glyphosate spraying team has been dispatched already. They're spraying the glyphosates on our streets again. So they're going to get the curbs, the sides of your walls, and they've managed to get them to agree to look at it differently and allow people to do their own. And then, so if you say, for example, Prescott Street, you don't want them to come, and you can get the neighbours to remove the weeds, then you can tell them not to come down your street.
Great, sounds really good development.
We've got to do it carefully because people, we need volunteer groups to organise as well. And they're saying that we have to do it with volunteers. We've got to train them to do it properly so no one falls over their bags of rubbish, or, you know, they're terrified of being sued, basically. So there've got to be some guidelines issued to people when they say you can do it on your own now, but you've got to wear gloves and you can't use a pickaxe or else that breaks the pavement. So it's
yeah.
That'll be next week. We're trying to work out a way forward, what to say to people.
Did anyone see Hackney Council? Some activists around there were drawing on chalk on the ground, naming the little plants that were coming through the cracks to make people perceive them, you know, a bit differently. So I thought that was a really cute idea, actually.
It is good, but here, you know, there's no point because they're going to be sprayed with glyphosate in like the next couple of weeks. So I'm going to ask them if they can put dye in the poison so that you can see when they've been, at least. And the other thing is that they're going to train the operatives to use the on-off button on their spray nozzle so that they don't just blanket spray everything, that they just target the weeds. So that's a bit of an improvement. So I'll watch this space, Hilary. I'll let you know when we've worked out a way forward that the council agreed to, and then perhaps groups like yourselves could put that information out.
Yes, we will. Because I had already been asked by somebody who'd seen the glyphosate spraying and saying, I thought they weren't going to do this. They were trialling these steam.
It didn't work. They decided, they said it was no good, so they're not going to do that.
Right.
We agreed that vinegar wasn't a good idea either, because that's also such a...
Well, it's not vinegar as such you need to use. It's something else.
It's like acid, isn't it? So, so there was no alternative but manual, or in the council's eye, manual or glyphosate, and that's gone down to glyphosate. So they're on the cusp of changing their mind.
Sounds like whoever's been involved here and the other people are doing fabulous work, because like I say, it's so horrible, but it seems like a lot of progression has happened. So Gillian, do send information to Earth Moves, and maybe we can put something on our website and in the next issue of the magazine.
That would be good, and maybe the Wildlife Trust would like to know.
Trust, yeah.
Yes, we would. We'd like to know what's going on.
Hilary, any final comments today? What would you like? Would you like to say goodbye to everyone, or suggest they visit a website of yours, or?
Well, do look at the Wirral Wildlife website, which is the obvious, wirralwildlife.org.uk. There's a Facebook page, similarly, and the New Ferry Butterfly Park also has a Facebook page. So do like those and do follow us. Linda is keeping things trotting along, posting photos and things like that, and things to look at, things people have seen to keep some interest going. We are hoping to open the Butterfly Park to visitors Sunday afternoons, but we're opening it very gently just to locals to start with. New Ferry's got so much housing which hasn't got any gardens and so forth. So there won't be a lot of publicity about that, but maybe later in the summer you'll be able to come along to that. And do go and look around your local area.
I'd like everyone to give Hilary a big clap because she's so fabulous. I love her so much. Thank you, Hilary.
Thank you very much.
It's been an absolutely beautiful event, like I thought it would be. So, with Hilary's...
And thank you to Richard, who's been keeping the technology.
Thank you, Richard! So I've unmuted everyone so you can all say goodbye to each other if you want to, and hopefully we'll have a similar event soon and meeting up in Telegraph Lane. So thank you so much everyone for being part of this beautiful event, especially Hilary. And yeah, have a beautiful day, enjoy nature, enjoy wildflowers, and hopefully now you'll be able to identify more of them. So take care everyone, look after yourselves.
Yes.
Bye everybody.
Bye.
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 Bye.